Welcome to Tuesdays with Suzanne. And today we are going to speak about connecting more deeply in the listening aspect of who we are as human beings. Last week we actually spoke about connecting physically and igniting your heart so that your joy can connect with people around you and you make deep connections again. This week I want to speak about listening. I was just speaking recently with one of my wonderful long-term colleagues. And he was saying that he has noticed coming out of the pandemic that people have been isolated, they've been alone. There's been a lot of trauma and loss for many, not everyone. And that in his sessions with people, he now takes more time in order to make sure that they feel listened to, they feel heard. Yeah. So I'd like to talk today about listening, because there are some specific things about listening that we as human beings do naturally, and then there's some things about listening that most of us forget. So take a moment now and settle in to hear a story about listening. So first of all, when you come into connection with another human being, it's a really wonderful idea to look them in the eyes and say, how are you? How are you really? How are you? And then be quiet and listen. I have to say this is particularly hard for me. I'm an extrovert. I'm often talking over people. I'm excited. I'm just really feeling connected. But when you want people to feel heard, it's very, very important to be quiet and listen. Really listen to what they have to say. Yeah. You can ask clarifying questions if you want to. What about that? How about that? What did you mean by that? And then you listen some more. Yeah. The other thing that I do a lot when I'm listening well is that I make soft affirmative sounds to let them know that I am listening. Mm-hmm. Yeah. These kinds of sounds let people know that you're not interrupting, but that you are hearing them. You are truly listening to them. Yeah. One of the things that often happens when we're listening to people is that it starts to sound familiar to us. And oftentimes when their story sounds familiar, our brain, which is a pattern maker by its nature, goes to the process of saying, oh, I've had this happen before. I know how to fix this. And off you go wanting to tell the person you're listening to exactly how to do what it is they're sharing and needing help with, because you know it. I can be really bad about this at times, because I've had lots of experiences in my life and I do know a lot about how to help people. However, this is the point where I really have to remind myself to stay quiet and let the person who's speaking find their own path home, because that's when they'll own it. That's when they'll own it. If I tell them how to do it, it's done. Now they might get an answer that might be helpful, but they've just been cut off from finding their own truth in the midst of it. Sometimes something that's good to say is to remind them that you're with them, you've got their back. You hear them. I hear you. And that you know, in the end, that they have what they need to pull this together, even as hard as it is right now. Yeah. So this is an interesting piece. If you add it to the whole component of touch that I talked about last week, one of the things that's important is to know that the quiet verbal interchange is equally important. Equally important. And the same friend years ago said to me decades ago, when I was in a very dark place in my life, he said, I was sharing some really hard stuff, and he just said in a very kind, quiet voice, "I am so sorry to hear that this is happening to you." And in that moment, a door cracked open, and I suddenly was able to see the trough that I had been floundering in for several years. And I was actually able to see the glimmer of a way out, because someone mirrored back to me. They saw me where I was and where I was caught. It was very, very potent, because his words, his simple words, started me on the path home. Yeah. And I've never looked back. And I have remembered that listening, gently feeding back, affirming the people you love, can be one of the most potent things that we do. I was speaking with a young man recently who had just been through really, really challenging, hard time. And I didn't have any answers for him. I didn't know what the answers were. I had some suggestions, but I knew those probably wouldn't be helpful. And what I ended up saying to him, which turned out to be, he said later, very, very helpful. I said to him, "I know that you have the intelligence, and I know that you have the courage to find your path out of this. I don't know how long it'll take you, but I do trust that you will find your way home on this one, because you're intelligent, because you're courageous, and you have the resources to do it when the time comes." It's what I said, it's what I meant. And he said how helpful that was for him to be reminded that even in his darkest hour, that someone saw him and reflected back who he was when he wasn't in his darkest hour. So this is another way in which reflecting back can be very, very helpful. Okay, that's about all I have for today. Take some time this week and listen to someone close to you, and really listen. And feel the connection that grows when you do. And enjoy.